evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm proud to be an Indian. I'm sure you are too. We are no longer the land of snake charmers and elephants as once we used to be. In fact, we stopped being that a long time ago. Today, we are a nation on the rise. A nation that is rising and the world is sitting back and watching. India has not just soared up in the sky, but we do it with our feet, steeply rooted in our culture and tradition. The image of India is changing and the world knows it and is recognizing it. Bharat has arrived. During our G20 presidency, we've had 125 nations descending on India. Over 220 meetings that have been held across 60 cities in 28 states. The heads of states were not just in awe of the modernity of Bharat Mandapam, but equally impressed by the glimpses of our traditional dance, art and culture. With Prime Minister Modi at the helm, Brand Bharat has arrived. The G20 presidency was encapsulated by the terminology that the Prime Minister himself put out, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Or you can say that Prime Minister Modi's Sabka Saath mantra, which he reiterated, saying that world is one family. What we do here in this part of the world will impact somebody in another part of the world. And today that has extended to the world, the same Sabka Saath and Sabka Vikas. In fact, the World Bank itself has hailed the transformation of India through digital public infrastructure. In its G20 report, the World Bank says that India has achieved in just 6 years what would have taken about 5 decades by building one of the world's largest digital government to people using digital public infrastructure. The financial inclusion rate has gone up from 25 to actually 80% in the last 6 years alone. This aided transfers of about $361 billion directly to beneficiaries from the 53 central government ministries through 312 key schemes. It also noted that the number of Jan Dhan accounts tripled to 147 million and has over 12 million women customers. And that is the reason why India is rising, why there is a transformational change. Humbled by the praise, Prime Minister Modi posted on social media that India's leap in financial inclusion, which is powered by digital public infrastructure, complements to our robust digital payment infrastructure and the spirit of our people. It is equally a testament to the rapid progress and innovation styles. While the Prime Minister hails our digital infrastructure, global leaders today acknowledge that Brand India almost seems invincible.
Now, I think there'll be many things that we'll be discussing here at the G20 under India's leadership, and I'm confident that we'll make very good progress on a range of different issues. I think G20 has been a huge success for India. India is the right country at the right time to be hosting this, and I feel we're going to have a very good couple of days of deliberations and decisions made.
इंडिया के यूथ, उनकी आबादी, उनकी एम्बिशन देखकर अमेरिका इंडिया के साथ काम करने के लिए तैयार है। हम समझते हैं कि इंडिया एक उभरती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था के हैसियत से अपना आवाज़ उठा रहे हैं।
This is the peak of a very successful and extremely impressive presidency. India has been, like no other president before, and I say that because Germany was also a president before, has put the G20 or elevated the G20 to the next level. I think they did a brilliant job. Now, and they did this job in a very difficult time. I think this is maybe the most difficult, politically the most difficult G20 presidency.
But it's not just this. S&P's global forecast says that India will surpass Japan to become the third largest economy by 2030. with the country's GDP projected to rise from $3.5 trillion in 2022 to about $7.3 trillion by 2030. In comparison, Vietnam's GDP growth rose by about 4.4%. Southeast Asia's biggest economy, Indonesia, expanded by about 5.17%. The Philippines' economy grew by 4.3%, while India's economy has grown at 7.8% in the June quarter, marking the fastest pace of growth in a year. From vaccine Maitri to solar alliance, from UPI to space exploration, there's no stopping Brand India. India is now being projected as the leader of the global south, especially by successfully pushing through the membership of the African Union in the G20. Inclusivity pitched by Modi has been the highlight of our presidency, clearly showing that it is the spotlight on human beings rather than on just growth numbers or position in the richest economies in the world.
Prime Minister, who's the leader of G20, he said India's presidency should actually be inclusive, it should be ambitious, it should be decisive, and it should be action-oriented. And these are the four principles on which we have worked. And I can assure you that we have lived up to his vision of being during our presidency.
Well, preparation, as I said, involved not only guidance at the government level at the highest levels, but also going down to the grassroots levels, to the states, municipalities, district administrations. We hosted meetings in many cities of ours that had no exposure to international events, also limited capacity to do that. What I think resulted in this is that we have created capacity where there was none. We have provided for infrastructural and urban transformations where they did not exist. As I said, as Prime Minister Modi has pointed out, India's human-centric development model is one that we are happy to share with the rest of the world.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the legitimate question on the NewsHour tonight. Has Modi become the face and the mascot of Brand Badhta Bharat? That's the question, and that's the debate on the other side.
You're watching the NewsHour at 9, debate number 1, on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
And joining me tonight is Jay Panda, National Vice President of the BJP, and also joining me with him is Mr. Pavan Varma, former Member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha and an ex-diplomat. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on the NewsHour tonight. I want to ask you, Mr. Jay Panda, do you think G20 presidency and the World Bank report, all of these have come out to recognize the power of Brand India, powered by Modi, his profile, his popularity, and his special touch and relationships with world leaders, which has made this G20 summit in India more special than many of the other summits that we've seen in the recent past?
Well, of course, India's image across the world has been transformed under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. Particularly in the last few years, we saw during the pandemic, India beat every prediction of doom and gloom. And in fact, to run the largest vaccination campaign in the history of humankind in the shortest period, and to help more than 100 other countries with vaccines, to then after that withstand the economic turbulence throughout the world far better than any other nation, and give aid to other nations in our neighborhood as well as across the world. This G20 summit is special because it symbolizes that transformation. And just look at the scale of it. Now, previous G20s under other countries' leaderships, presidencies, have had usually 3 or 4 events. A very large country like China would do a dozen events in 3 or 4 cities. Now, in India has had 200 events, over 60 locations. So it is more than an order of magnitude more than any other nation. And yes, of course, whether it's the World Bank report or the IMF report, which pointed out that extreme poverty in India has fallen below 1%. And this comes in the context when some of these ratings agencies have taken a rather pessimistic view of other major global economies. And so this is indeed a breakthrough moment for India.
Mr. Pavan Varma, I'll take off from where Jay Panda left it off. And I want to ask you, do you share the optimism that India today is emerging as a serious player on the high table at the global forum? The fact that India's growth story, the fact that India's handling of the COVID situation, the fact that innovations, the fact that Atmanirbharta, and just the fact that India is today seen as a capable country that can push the boundaries, its digital performance has added an aura of a country that's on the rise.
I cannot disagree, Navika, because I think India is sitting on the high table of the global community. I think the stock of India abroad is at a new level, and I've spoken to many NRIs abroad who feel that for the first time India is being taken seriously by the world. So I think the brand India has certainly gone up, and I will concede that it is linked to brand Modi. There is no questioning the fact that today there is a brand Modi. His energy, his eloquence, his personal popularity, his relentless work levels, and I think quick decision making, all of these have contributed to important changes in the perception of India and in the reality of India. Having said that, I think that if India has to fulfill the potential that we now see the country has, there are 3 or 4 things that Prime Minister Modi, should he return in 2024, will have to look at. One is, it's a matter of great pride that India's GDP is today the highest in the world. But when you reduce that GDP to per capita, we are still one of the poorest countries in the world for the size of economy we have. In other words, the problem of growing inequality. I am not saying that there is any magic wand to resolve it, but I think more needs to be done, because while the number of billionaires have been growing, and startups too, which I commend, I think there are too many people still who cannot afford a meal a day or who cannot read or write. Secondly, you cannot live permanently by giving 80 million or 80 crore people doles in terms of food rations. We have problems ahead, including the possibility of a drought. Our food stocks have fallen to a new low, and therefore I think ultimately the solution is not continuing to give free food, but to find them jobs. People need jobs to be able to earn and contribute to a rising India. So, which brings me to my second point, that unemployment in the face of economic growth is something that Prime Minister Modi and the government will need to tackle.
Very well said. Let's take those 2 points. Let's take those 2 points and get Mr. Jay Panda to answer those before we get on to the next set of arguments that you have. But Jay Panda, there is a clear case that while we may have traveled the path to growth, there is still miles to go before we sleep. That's the point I think Mr. Pavan Varma is trying to make. And he is saying that, yes, India has done very well, but there is a long distance we still need to cover. And that's where politics, reforms, and international relations will all come into play. How do you respond to the questions Mr. Pavan Varma raises?
I think these two important issues deserve an answer, and let me give you a clear answer. So regarding jobs, although job creation has been a challenge for India for many decades, there is a stunning growth of jobs being created under Prime Minister Modi's leadership. If you look at the data that is coming out, over the past 1 year, about 15 million formal jobs have been created, which is well over 1 million jobs a month, which has been a holy grail for a long time. Secondly, if you look at the last 4 months or so, new records are being created in job creation with every passing month. And this goes hand in hand with the big surge in GST revenue collections, which indicates, which corroborates that India is the fastest growing economy, now the 5th largest. The other point that he raised is about food aid. Yes, India under the Modi government runs the world's largest food aid program with 900 million people getting food aid. But this is not a dole, as he points out, because for more than half a century we have had the opposite problem of a lot of surplus grains, which we lose a lot to wastage and to rats eating them. So this is not the India of the 1960s, where we depended on aid from developed countries to do this. And of course, Navika, you are right that the Prime Minister would be the first to acknowledge that these important milestones are milestones on the way towards much greater targets that are being set. As Prime Minister Modi has pointed out, we will be a 5 trillion economy and the third largest economy in the world during his third term. And already captains of industry, economists and others are predicting that just a few short years after that, we would double the economy to become a $10 trillion economy. Now, finally, I think the most important question that my friend Pavan Varma raised is about equality. Now, when countries grow rapidly, usually inequality grows rapidly, but India has done very well on this front. There is an index called the Gini index, which measures this, and I think your viewers will be happy to learn that India's Gini index number indicates that we have better equality than the United States, we have better equality than China. We are doing very well on the Gini index in terms of equality among many European nations, if you compare. So I think despite the very rapid growth of the economy that we are facing, the management in terms of carrying everybody, sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas, sabka prayas, is actually panning out quite well.
Well, Mr. Varma, the fact of the matter is, and we live in the times where cooperative federalism has been questioned. During this entire year of India's presidency of the G20, the fact that 200 odd meetings have been held in 60 cities in every single state of India, does it not convey the message of the Prime Minister on how committed he is, that there cannot be those inequalities even politically? The fact is, the attempt has been made, but politically, are we in India still at a level where we continue to question and look at the glass half empty rather than the glass half full?
Navika, in a democracy, this debate is not only natural but desirable, because if everybody agrees, there will never be interrogation. And I am the first to praise Mr. Modi for what he has achieved, and I offer in a constructive spirit what remains to be done. On unemployment, there are lies and there are statistics, and Jay has the statistics on his command, but I have seen many analysis which show that unemployment is the single biggest concern among Indians. The middle class has shrunk, and the number of poor have maybe fallen, because when the economy grows as a whole, all boats are lifted. But that inequality today is perhaps the highest in the world, where 10% of the top crust owns 60% or more of the country's wealth. So that point I just wanted to rebut. As far as your second point, yes, I don't believe any other country, including our own, because we've had the NAM summit here, we've had the Commonwealth summit, has used an occasion like the current G20 presidency to showcase India as a whole. In other words, to show the diversity, the attractiveness, the sheer scale and magnitude of what India has to offer. I concede that. But cooperative federalism is not about holding events in different states. It is about respecting states and their constitutional rights within a framework of unity in diversity. In other words, there are many state governments which feel that their voice is not being given enough importance to, and often there is some kind of distinction made between governments which are run by the ruling party and otherwise. But I leave that to the states and the center to decide. You mentioned Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and Jay mentioned it, and Sabka Prayas. I think he began his prime ministership and a new era of Indian politics with this slogan. It's a commendable slogan. But I genuinely feel that it needs to be translated on the ground, not only by the fact that Labharthis are not discriminated on the basis of caste and creed and all are beneficiaries, but also respect for the plurality and the multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious entity that is India, which is a great calling card for India abroad, where people of different religious communities live, and the Prime Minister's slogan is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. I think that there is a new social divisiveness in society, where the impression is that sometimes people of other communities are being left out of the level of respect and dignity and tolerance they deserve. I can go to the next point, but if you'd like to have
social divisiveness, Jay Panda, those are, even if the Prime Minister says Vasudeva Kutumbakam, Mr. Pavan Varma is not impressed that that is being followed at home itself.
Actually, I thank Pavan Varma for acknowledging India's new image across the world and Prime Minister Modi's popularity, not just at home but across the world. Of course, Pavan is very eloquent, but in his answers itself, I think, are clues to my answers. The reality is, as I said, the Gini index proves that we are doing better than countries like the US and China and other countries on equality. In terms of the slogan of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Pavan himself acknowledged that in the massive programs run by the Modi government, look at this, drinking water through a pipe was available to only 16% of Indian households at the beginning of the Modi government. Today it is touching 70%, and soon it will be 100% in the next couple of years. This is a massive transformation, and Pavan himself acknowledged that there has not been even a single case of discrimination on the basis of religion or caste on any of these massive government programs. So that is truly Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Now, in terms of social divisiveness, I think this government, this entity, this leadership has done more for India than ever before. I mean, look, it took more than 75 years for an Adivasi to become President of India. And if you look at President Draupadi Murmu, it is not tokenism. At every stage of her public life, she has excelled. This is the kind of person, as was Dr. Kalam, as was President Kovind. These are the kind of people that the BJP supports to bring to the forefront, to elevate to the highest levels of society, to overcome the divisiveness that some people are alleging. Now, I will conclude by saying that really the frustrated elements of current Indian society are really only those who have been repeatedly rejected by India's vast electorate. They are the ones who are grumpy. But otherwise, you will see a vast support for the rise of India, both within Indians who are very aspirational, are happy with this turnaround in India, and of course, across the world, where world leaders and even the general populations, and of course our vast diaspora, are welcoming India's rise.
Well, Mr. Pavan Varma, let me also ask you about the democratization of the approach of the Prime Minister in the schemes that he's done, as he's doing it in the G20 as well. And you'll see it that he's becoming the voice of the African Union to make it very clear to the world, as he has through his schemes in India, that it's not only about what you have or how much wealth your country has that should determine who's going to sit at the G20 table. There are people and vast populations that are still sitting. They have no access to the development in the rest of the world. The 1.5 crore people in the African Union. So when the Prime Minister brings the African Union to the G20 table, isn't he becoming a voice of those who are probably at the bottom of the ladder as far as the fruits of development are concerned? Exactly how his prime ministership over the last 9 years has been shaped in India itself. And this has been also endorsed by the World Bank's report, which says that 50 years, what would have taken people 50 years, 5 decades, has been done in 6 years in terms of the digital transformation and how, the Labhartis are actually now getting money into their banks. That is something, isn't the opposition really forgetting and missing in this country itself?
No, Navika, let me tell you, as far as India's stock in the world, and in general, in the realm of foreign policy, I give very high marks to to Prime Minister Modi's government. I think today India is a trusted interlocutor between both the North and the South in economic terms, and in international relations. The Ukraine crisis just showed that it has taken a stand whereby Russia trusts India, and so does the United States and the West. I think in that sense, I give high marks to where the country's standing is at the global level. And of course, we are all as Indians proud of the remarkable fruition of the digital revolution. It is something that makes every Indian proud, and it greatly helps in the task of development. When I was speaking about social disharmony, Navika, and my question, I take on board what Jay said. But you see, there is a direct correlation between economic development and social harmony. And if there is a feeling that there is a divide on the basis of religion, which erupts often in terms of communal clashes, which in today's time should not happen if everything is so inclusive. And some of them are politically managed, I concede. But look at the situation where recently the riots in Haryana came to the capital of the financial system in the north, in Gurugram, where the Fortune 500 companies have offices. And In fact, there were prohibitory orders. They asked their employees to work from home. Schools and colleges were closed. I think the Prime Minister, in his general messaging, must actually convey and implement the inclusion of all aspects of the community. And I mean it in a way to strengthen his brand, because I think that is something that causes concern, even about observers of India abroad, and even among Indians who otherwise commend much of what Prime Minister Modi has done.
Jay Panda, response?
So, okay, the Prime Minister does always reach out to every Indian. And I think, the basis of any response should be as such. If there were any intentions of divisiveness among the governing party, then at least somebody would be able to point out one example of discrimination out of the hundreds of millions of Indians who are being served by the Modi government's various programs. I talked to you about piped water. There are literally hundreds of programs. Look at the social transformation that is taking place on gender equity. The Prime Minister championed Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and for decades what has been a scourge for the nation of sex selection leading to millions of girls being unborn. Now that has turned around. Some of the states that had the worst statistics now have superb statistics. Now, so if you can't point to any statistical, factual evidence of discrimination, then you have to come down to the point that indeed in such a large nation, there are occasional law and order challenges, there are occasional people who disrupt the harmony, but the government is committed, the BJP is committed to the constitution which treats each and every Indian as equal, and the response of the government in all the cases has been that every Indian must be treated equally. Now, the other question that Pavan raised, I think is important, and you touched upon, about these big gatherings like G20, and this is of course a new peak. There was a reference to NAM and earlier gatherings, but I think there is a very substantive qualitative difference from our earlier non-aligned movement days, because those gatherings were gatherings of the have-nots who were outside the room, and they were getting together to press the demands of the global south. Today the difference is India sits at the high table. It is the preeminent voice of the global south. It does have the trust of not just the African Union, but developing nations across the world, as well as developed nations with whom we sit at the high table. And today, as a nation which is the fastest growing, which is one of the key engines of the global economy, and the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy is not just words. We have demonstrated that with the vaccine Maitri help to so many nations. We have demonstrated that with financial aid to so many nations who have had their backbones broken after the pandemic and because of debt obligations which they are not able to service. So indeed, this is a totally different position that India has, both quantitatively and qualitatively, in where it stands in the world.
And let me ask you, Mr. Pavan Varma, in 2014, when Brand Modi began, his tenure, we were hyphenated with Pakistan. Today, we are hyphenated maybe with China. And isn't that a happy position to be in? Because China has been seen as a superpower. Today, when there is a bilateral meeting between President of the United States, Biden, and Prime Minister, do we not notice this is the second meeting in 70 days between the two leaders, something that's never happened before? And Russia, we maintained our relationship with Russia, yet balanced, the concerns of the war with Ukraine. We found a breakthrough in the Bali G20. Mr. Pavan Varma, can you deny the fact that Brand Modi and Brand India, powered by Brand Modi, has made a difference, and the world today takes us way more seriously and almost as a link between the developing nations, the voice of the developing nations, and a bigger player also with the developed world. We are members of the Quad. We are part of the G20. We have such a huge voice at the G20. We are part of, so many fora now, which we never were before.
Navika, you have repeated what I said myself with pride, and I accepted. And all the points you have made is something that I've already said. So on foreign policy and India's standing on the world currently, we do not have differences. We are all Indians after all. I was saying...
Well, you're being magnanimous, Mr. Pavan Varma, but the Congress has said, Putin is not coming, China's not coming. They've been rather churlish about the G20 as well. Do you share their view?
I cannot speak for the Congress. No, Navika. No, Navika, I do not share that view because in a summit of this nature, and please see the record of past summits, there are often more than half a dozen leaders who don't appear, and a lot depends also in the context in which the G20 summit meeting is taking place. So I think the G20 is a success already, even if there is no Delhi declaration. The fact that it was held and that India is a trusted interlocutor in a most select club of countries with influence is important enough. So I'm not going there. I am focusing on what more can be done to make India what it can become and what needs to be burnished or added to Brand Modi. I mentioned a few points. Since time is short, I'd like to mention two more if you like, and then Jay can respond to them. One is that we are at a historical cusp where the China +1 policy, India can be a new investment destination for a world which holds China in bad odor. The Chinese economy is in relative decline, although much bigger still than ours. For that, I think Prime Minister Modi, having had absolute majorities over 2 terms for 10 years now and possibly another term, I think he should see that we capitalize on this opportunity by pushing with greater focus and consistency on economic reform. I know it's difficult in a democracy, and sometimes what is good for the country is also opposed. But one of the advantages we have had is of a stable government with an absolute majority. It should be used to push economic reforms further in order to make India capable of playing the role for which the opportunity economically has come to it globally. And one last point, because then Jay can respond to both. I think the Brand Modi notion should not lead to a complete breakdown of trust between the government, the ruling party and the opposition. And it has reached that point because a perception exists among opposition parties that they are being targeted, there is misuse of agencies, and that they are often being pilloried for the fact that they are against Prime Minister Modi and his government.
All right.
I think he needs to give more space to dissent. And I think instruments like bulldozer justice have to end. We have a constitution and a rule of law. They cannot be sanctified.
Well, those cases of bulldozer justice have gone to courts, and the courts, wherever they have looked at these, have not found them against the rule of law. But Jay Panda, please respond.
Look, as far as, you correctly pointed out that the opposition is being churlish, but not just churlish. The Congress party, and especially one of its leaders, has made a career of speaking negatively, not just about the Prime Minister or the BJP, but about India itself. Every achievement of India is doubted, questioned, and spun negatively. But as I said, these are the people that have been repeatedly rejected by the Indian electorate. And so this is their frustration speaking out. It's not based on anything in reality. Now, you talked about, Pavan talked about the Prime Minister's immense popularity. No, it's not just his view or my view. Just last week, Pew, which is the most trusted polling agency around the world, rated the Prime Minister's popularity rating at 80%. Now, that is astronomical. That goes further than even Chandrayaan-3. Let me explain why. Because in democracies, in developed countries, leaders who have 40-45% popularity are considered very popular, and their greatest aspirations are to go to 50-55% popularity. To have 80% popularity is just enormous, and that is being put to good use. Now, regarding China, basically there are hardly 2 or 3 countries that may feel a little jealous or unhappy about India's growth. But the vast majority of the nations around the world welcome India's rise as a friendly force, as a positive force. Now, coming to China, that China plus one strategy that Pavan was referring to, I think is already passé. That may have been useful a few years ago, but today China is facing its own internal challenges. Its demographics, its population has fallen off a cliff for the first time in 50 years, having negative growth, and very sharply negative now. Their economy, which was the toast of the world for more than 4 decades, seems to have run into a brick wall. They have immense challenges of their own to deal with, and India is attracting enormous new investment and support. So I think we should take that in the positive spirit. And of course, Navika, as we were talking, the days of being hyphenated with Pakistan is long gone. It's, Pakistan and India occupy different universes today. So that is no longer an issue. The issue is, as we transition to a 5 trillion economy and a 10 trillion economy in the visible future, we should maintain this trajectory that the Prime Minister has established of building friendship and trust across the world and using it for the mutual good.
Well, absolutely. Challenges will always remain for any country as large as India. There will be challenges. There will be challenges on the economic front. There will be challenges on the social front. There will be challenges on the political front. But when Pavan Varma says India is on the cusp of something great, many people in this country do believe this is the time for India, and India is demonstrating it. Brand India has arrived, and Brand Modi is powering this big moment for India. How the G20 world leaders actually look at this, what kind of agreements they reach, will possibly have the detail of how India can also broker peace and get agreements going. All eyes on that to happen tomorrow, when the G20 goes on from tomorrow to day after tomorrow. We'll get on to that and bring you the latest on that. But thank you, Pavan Varma, and thank you, Jay Panda, for joining me on this very special session. On the